Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're excited to see some of your faces both physically and online. And we look forward to definitely having an informative session with Dr. Marc Hauser, who is here for the Masterclass on childhood trauma and how the past cups the present and the future. So my name is Natalie Bulut, and I'm an intern at the Founder's Office in Shamiri Institute, where I support the work that we're doing through the Shamiri Academy. Through this academy, we're pioneering mental health learning and training that inspires and equips the next generation of mental health caregivers, both here in Kenya and beyond. We're just getting started, as most of you know, because this is the first of many certificate courses and diploma courses that we are going to launch through the academy. However, for today's session, we're lucky to be joined by Dr. Marc Hauser, who will be walking us through how the tough experiences we face as children can leave lasting marks on not only our lives, but also leaving us with the seeds of hope on how we can build and help children recover from trauma, as well as build resilience towards a more positive future. Dr. Marc Hauser has over 30 years of experience as an educator and research scientist. He has prolific research with over 300 publications that have been published and 7 books which focus on how the brain evolves, develops, and is altered by damage and neurodevelopment disorders. With those few remarks, I'd like us all to put our hands together to welcome Dr. Marc Hauser to stage.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you all for being here, both online and in person. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. The topic, as you can see here, is childhood trauma, how the past sculpts the present and the future. And the way I want to start tonight is to talk to you about 2 individuals that I got to know personally, and their stories, personal stories, tell something important to you about not only the nature of trauma and how it shapes individuals, but also a story about resilience and how one can bounce back from those experiences. Okay? This first story is also personal for another reason, which is to share with you the fact that in 1983 to 1985, I lived in Kenya, in Amboseli National Park. And in 1984, during kind of the sort of strong period of the drought in Kenya, which was, of course, harming many individuals and putting great stress on families, I went with my assistant, who was Kenyan, to a wedding. It was a combo wedding. And during that wedding, I met a wonderful woman who was probably in her late 70s, and she was an auntie. And we talked, and she told me stories, and I told her stories. And then she introduced me to her daughter, who was Serena. And Serena was about 12 years old. And Auntie Mumbe, which was her name, she was taking care of her. And as the night unfolded, and I spoke with Serena, but I also spoke a lot with her aunt, it came to pass that Serena's both parents had been killed in front of her when she was about 7 years old, and that is when her aunt, who was already a quite old and frail woman, had to take her under her care. She then suffered from very extreme bouts of malaria, where she almost died. She went through long, long periods of poverty and insufficient food and neglect. She was often, when she was a child, beaten by a drunk father. The parents often separated and came back together again. So over the course of a very short period of time, Serena had suffered tremendously as a child during these very early and critical periods of development. Serena, I've lost touch with. I don't know what's happened to her. Okay? But this is an example of extreme maltreatment in some ways, of neglect, and although her aunt was doing her best, she was very frail and old, and there's just so much she could do. Okay? Let me tell you a second story. This was a boy who I met when he was about 12 years old. His name was Badrick. Badrick was from Jamaica, so a little island in the Caribbean. And Badrick and his parents had moved when Badrick was about 12 years old. When I first met Badrick, I got involved in a physical restraint of him on the ground in a school for children with social and emotional disabilities. Badrick was in an absolute rage, and it took 4 large men, I wasn't one of the large men, but I was a man nonetheless, to control a little boy of about 12 who had fury in his eyes and wanted to kill us. So we were able to calm him down eventually, and that was the first of many such restraints. When Badrick would get angry, the first response was to fight. Why? Well, Badrick grew up on the streets of Kingston, often alone. When his father heard that he did poorly in school, he would beat him. The father also beat the mother, so he was exposed to domestic violence frequently. His father had the same history of living life out on the streets. So here we have kind of a transgenerational relay of information, right? One traumatic experience is relayed to the next generation, and that cycle can be perpetuated. The good news is that Badrick, through the initiatives of the school, learned to regulate his emotions, learned to change aggression into using his words to ask for things he needed, and ultimately, Badrick graduated and moved on to a much more successful life. Some of that is resilience, some of that is the support he received in school and outside. 2 stories, 2 individuals, 2 exposed to extreme childhood trauma. One I don't know what happened to, the other we do, and it's a success story. So here's what we're going to do today, today's journey. We are going to start with the past. A very significant message for you today is that we can only work with individuals who seem to be suffering in some way if we understand what happened to them and how that past experience has shaped who they are today. And the primary message is that what happens in childhood carries with us unless we can intervene and help those individuals recover and build resilience. So we start in the past. What happened to me? We then turn to the present. What's happening to me? And what you will learn is that the past shapes or sculpts the present. How we are experiencing things that are affecting what we do now. And where we end tonight is talking about the future. What can I do to transform or shape or change those prior experiences so that I can lead a more healthy, productive, and meaningful life? And as all of you know, the young mind is more easily sculpted than the adult mind. But there are people all over the world as adults who continue to suffer from the childhood experiences they had long ago. Okay? All right, so let's start here with the past. And to do this, I need to tell you about a very important study. This study was officially published in 1998. This is not that long ago. In Southern California in the United States, in San Diego, this gentleman you see here, Dr. Vincent Felitti, was a preventative medicine doctor. He actually lives to this day. And his focus at that time was on a clinic for morbidly obese individuals. These were individuals who were suffering from extreme weight. And his program was designed to reduce that weight significantly by 50%, 75% over the course of a year. And he was very successful with doing this. Now, as you can imagine, if someone's weight is reduced within a year by 50 or 75%, you've got to keep monitoring them because there could be health consequences that follow from that, or the weight might rebound. Okay? So one day, he had a client. Her name was Patty, and Patty weighed about 430 pounds when she came into the clinic, and within 1 year, she was down to 140 pounds. Quite amazing. But as he was monitoring her, her weight started to come back. And so Dr. Felitti brought her into his office and said, is there something going on in your life that could explain this increase in weight? She said, well, I know this is going to sound very strange, but I live alone, I go to sleep, and when I wake up and come down to my kitchen, there are pots and pans and plates everywhere, as if I was cooking in my sleep. He said, well, it's possible you may be sleepwalking and doing that. That's a reasonable explanation. He says, is there anything going on in your life in addition that you might not be that, happy about or concerned about? She said, well, I'm having a sexual romantic relationship with an older gentleman in my work. How do you feel about it? Says Dr. Felitti. She says, well, not very good. Why is that, Patty? She says, well, when I was a child, I was repeatedly raped by my grandfather. Now, this just stopped Felitti in his tracks for two reasons. Of course, the information is painful. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly for tonight, he has a doctor working with adults, had never asked them about their childhood. Never. And most likely, he wasn't alone. So he proceeded to ask everybody in his clinic, about 100 individuals, morbidly obese, whether they ever had had a sexually abusive history. 80%, men and women, said yes. 80%. He goes to a conference for people with eating disorders, all doctors, and he presents his results. The doctors in the audience laugh at him. Why? They say to him, how can you believe these people? They're just coming up with excuses for their weight. So he was completely disheartened. How could these medical doctors not understand that childhood can shape the future? That night at dinner, he's sitting next to a gentleman from the Center for Disease Control. And this gentleman turns to him and says, look, I don't know if you're right or wrong, but if you're right and childhood can be a cause of obesity, we have a major problem on our hands. So my recommendation to you is that you go back to your hospital and you learn about how childhood experiences can affect adult health outcomes. So he goes back and he creates a survey called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. The acronym is ACES, A-C-E. And the ACES questionnaire involved 10 questions about childhood experiences that may have happened before the age of 18. And they fell into 3 broad clusters, which I'm going to share with you now. The first was abuse. Before the age of 18, it asked, were you physically abused, sexually abused, or emotionally abused? If you were, you simply wrote yes. Okay? Abuse, first category. Second category, neglect. Were you physically or emotionally neglected? If yes, you would put a Y. If no, you put an N. Okay? And then the third category is what was called household dysfunction. Things within the household that would be very disruptive to a young child. Was there substance abuse in the household? Alcohol, drugs, any kind of substance abuse? Yes or no? Were your parents separated or divorced? Yes or no? Was there a parent with mental illness, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia? Okay. Was a parent incarcerated? Yes or no? Was the mother treated violently, domestic violence? So here we have 10 questions. Did these experiences happen to you before the age of 18? This questionnaire led to a score, an ACE score. 0, I had none of these. 10, I had all of these, or some number in between. Okay? So, quite simple, 10 questions, score from 0 to 10. Okay? He administered this to approximately 17,000 individuals who were coming into his hospital once a year, and therefore there was a lot of health information they were getting naturally, and now they were also getting information on the ACEs questionnaire. So please don't try to write this down. The general idea is this is a health checkup. They looked at things like behavior, someone with no physical activity, smoking, alcohol, drugs, missed work, and then a whole suite of physical and mental health potential problems. Was there depression, diabetes, cancer, suicidal ideation, sexually transmitted diseases? Okay, so they had all this information already because these individuals were coming in for health checkups. So the question was there a relationship between the ACE score on the one hand and the health score on the other? And here's what they found. The number of ACEs and health risks increased proportionally. In other words, if you had 0 ACEs, you had far lower health risks than if you had 2, 3, 4, and up. What do I mean by health risks? Here are the numbers, and they're staggering. People with 4 or more ACEs have between 160 to 1,120% higher risk of cancer, drug abuse, suicide, depression, and anxiety. Those numbers are extraordinary. Not like a 10% increase, right? 160 to 1,120%. When they published these results in one of the most distinguished journals in medicine, the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, in 1998, it sent a shockwave through the medical community. No one had seen any result like this as a risk factor, and neither had anyone looked at childhood. So as you can imagine, people started to think, is there something strange about San Diego? Like, what's going on in San Diego? Or is this happening all over the United States? So what they soon did is they started administering this questionnaire all over the United States. And what they found was that independently of race, wealth, education, gender, or politics, in our country, Republican, Democrat, Independent, these factors made no difference. ACEs were prevalent across all these factors of cultural variation. If you were very wealthy, you had ACEs. If you were very poor, you had ACEs. Okay? So these things didn't make a difference. But what I want to show you is that doesn't mean that some populations might not be vulnerable to more ACEs. And so what I want to show you now is a short video clip that was taken from a maximum security prison in the United States, where what you will see is that the coordinator of this experience requires about 235 inmates who are in for lifetime of parole, no parole, lifetime in the prison, to form a circle. And she's going to read these questions on the ACEs questionnaire. And if they have one of those ACEs, they step into the circle. Okay? I just want you to watch what happens, and I want you to watch their faces. These are adults. Okay?
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yeah! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
Very powerful. I've seen that video, 200 times. Every time it brings tears to my eyes. These are men who you can see have suffered, and what does their head do when they walk? This. Shame. Shame. So you can see there are these concentrations, and as we've now come to learn, in prison populations in particular, there's a very high ACEs score. Very, very high. Okay? These are highly traumatized individuals. Highly traumatized. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So from the US, the World Health Organization got wind of this, right? Because what's the World Health Organization interested in? Health issues. Here's a major health risk. What happened when COVID came around? They declared it a pandemic. Okay? So they started to give the questionnaire across the globe. And what they found was that ACEs was not particular to the United States. ACEs were everywhere. Here's a statistic for you. Every year now, what we are learning from the World Health Organization is that 1 billion children every year are maltreated. 1 billion. How many people do we have in the world? About 7, 8 billion? It's a lot of children. A lot of children. Okay. Not only that, the cost to the world is estimated to be $14 trillion per year of lost work opportunity, of healthcare costs, prison reform issues, right? Massive economic burden. But let's not get overwhelmed by these statistics. Remember Serena, Badrick, and all the individuals that you know, that you may be working with, right? They're everywhere. Something has to be done, and we need to recognize the extraordinary burden on the individual's well-being that childhood adversity has. Okay? But I want to take us tonight beyond that original ACE study, in part because the sciences have grown tremendously in the last 20 years. Remember, 1998. So we have a couple of decades under our belt of science, and we've learned a lot, and that's important to share with you tonight. The first thing is adverse. I just gave you some examples of adversity. But all the examples I gave you occur within the family, right? Household dysfunction, abuse, neglect. These are all within the family. And yet childhood adversity is not restricted to within the family. And so what, of course, we've now recognized is there are many things that happen outside the family. I, as a child, was extremely badly bullied by peers. That's a form of adversity. It went on for a year, very badly. Many of you may have been bullied. Okay? Poverty, disease, war, community violence. These happen outside, but they directly impact the child. Think of those children growing up in Gaza or the Ukraine today. That's not a typical experience, and yet those children are living that every day, sometimes for years. So we need to stretch our sense of what counts as adversity, because by looking at that, we will learn more about what affects the child. Secondly, I just said childhood was, based on the survey, what happens from birth to 18. But childhood starts in utero with that fetal development, and it continues beyond 18 to at least the age of 25, because this system of the brain, our frontal lobes, the biggest part of our brain, continues to develop until at least 25 years of age, under good conditions. So childhood, what happens in utero, is affected by the mother's environment. If the mother is stressed, that triggers a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol at high levels injures the developing fetus. So we need to think about how we can protect mothers and fathers from the stresses they may be experiencing so that fetus develops in a good way and emerges into the world in a way that's good and healthy. So it starts in fetal development and it continues to 25 at least. Third, what's an experience? Some experiences are short-lived and some are very long-lived. They may last for the entire childhood of a child. Let me give you an example. We all lived as a planet through COVID. And one thing that COVID did was it socially isolated many of us in the world, right? Children were sent home from school in certain parts of the world, right? Children may have been very alone if they were just with their parents. Our youngest daughter came home from college and she was just with us. We think we're pretty good parents, but we're not her peers. Those teenage years are a critical window where experience of social interactions is fundamental. What do I mean by that? Social interactions for a teenager is as important as milk is to a baby. If a baby doesn't get milk, that baby does not grow well. If a teenager doesn't get social interactions, they will not grow well. And we are now seeing in schools all over the world that you have teenagers who are socially immature because they were deprived of social interactions by COVID. Okay? So that was an experience. It lasted only about 2 years. It was painful for all of us. And then it ended. But those 2 years were important for those teenagers. Less for the really young ones and less for the older ones. But it impacted their development. The fourth thing I want to mention today is that some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, I have 5 ACEs. Does that mean I have a higher cancer risk? No. And here's why. The ACEs questionnaire was designed to look at populations. If a population of people have a score of, let's say, 4 or more, that population is at higher risk of these diseases, not the individual. The individual score is not predictive of what's going to happen to them. Why? Because some individuals are more resilient than others, some are more vulnerable, and so how someone responds to the ACEs is not known. So let me give you a little more terminology which speaks to this last point about the ACEs. Remember what the ACEs stands for: adverse childhood experiences. It's not the response to the experience, it's the experience. Were you neglected? Yes or no? I don't know how you respond to the neglect, but were you or not? It's the experience. So let me give you 2 more terms to think about. One is some experiences lead to a traumatic response. What does trauma mean? It comes from the Greek word for scarring. It's a scar to the body and brain. If the experience leads to a scar, then you've had a traumatic response. But some of the same experiences for some individuals do not lead to trauma. They lead rather to resilience. So let's have a second set of acronyms. If it's a traumatic response, then it's a TRACE or TRACES. And if it's a resilient response, it's RACEs. Okay? So traumatic versus resilient responses. So let's keep that distinction in mind. One is the experience, the second is the response. Within the responses, some may be traumatic and some may be resilient, and we want to understand both. Because if we can understand, for example, what makes someone more resilient, then maybe we can use that knowledge to help those that are having the traumatic responses not have trauma. This ends the first part, which is the past. So I want to take a little mini pause here and see if anybody has some questions. So we can go to that next slide, Ian. And we'll take one or two questions or comments before we go on to the next part. So I open it up to you, and including those who are online, to either make a comment or a question, and then we can move on to the next part.
My question's around trauma and the ACEs, the questionnaire. Is it possible that people, I don't know how to frame this, but have trauma without really knowing that they have trauma?
Yeah, great question. So just to repeat that, so is it the possibility that people have trauma without knowing it? Really important question. So what we'll learn about in some sense in the second and third parts is that what trauma can do is cause, in some ways, a complete unawareness of how the body is responding, okay? I'm going to give you a really good example of this. Soon after Felitti published his ACEs study, he got a letter from a woman who was a circuit court judge in the United States. This is like one of the highest levels of a magistrate within Kenya. Very successful, right? She was in her 50s. Very successful. She writes to him and says, "Thank you so much for sharing this study. When I was a child, I was raped by my father. Now at the age of 50, she had 4 different cancers, and she never understood why. What does stress from the ACEs do? It kills the immune system. She didn't know. In some level, she was successful cognitively. She's able to be a judge right? Go through college, go to law school, become a judge. Amazing trajectory. And yet, what was happening inside of her was her immune system was dying. So she didn't know the scarring that happened. And importantly, which is why your question is so important, the scarring can happen at the immune system, the autonomic system, and the neural system. All 3 can be affected, and not necessarily all 3 together. She was neurobiologically quite good. Autonomically, probably quite good. But immunologically, quite bad, off. So yes, people can see it, and they can see it all 3 of those levels, and they may not know. Another thing, which we'll come back to, is that many children have pushed those memories away, right? Because they're painful. Why remember those things? But they're still in there, even if they're subconsciously, unconsciously having an effect.
Now that you've even pointed that out, how can you differentiate as a mental health practitioner if somebody's response is actually resilience or it's a trauma response to whatever happened when they were younger? For example, even just using that. So now they're this successful person because they have been able to either push down their emotions and focus on this particular part. So how can we maybe finesse that bit?
Yeah, also a great question. And we'll talk more about this soon. But the short version of the answer is one of the burdens on mental health practitioners is that most mental health practitioners have one tool in their toolkit, which is they're going to talk to you, they're going to find out about your history, but they're not getting any physiological evidence. Nothing about the immune system, nothing about the autonomic system, and very little about the neural system except from what comes out behaviorally, right? That's the mental health practitioner's toolkit. It's behavior, language, right? So what I've just told you about is that is clearly insufficient because where the trauma may be showing up is not through the language, okay? So that's part one of my answer. Part two is there are many adaptive responses that individuals with trauma have learned about that are coping mechanisms. But resilience, the key piece to resilience is that resilience is bouncing back without scarring. The question is where the scar occurs, okay? So, for example, I'll give you just one illustration which will come up in a moment, but it's helpful here. There was a child that was in a classroom I was teaching. I had never been in the classroom. I came in to teach some critical thinking skills. I walk into the classroom. A little boy runs out of the room immediately. And I'm like, what happened? Did I say? I didn't say anything yet. So a teacher comes up to me, puts her arm on my shoulder and says, look, I'm really, really sorry, but you look like his father who beats him. I was his trigger. His response of running out the door, the most adaptive thing he could ever do, right? If it looks like my father, I'm out of here. Good response, kid, right? Here's the analogy. If you're a gazelle on the savannah and a lion attacks your group, your conclusion isn't that lion is bad, all lions are bad. Very good conclusion for a gazelle, right? I don't care what lion it is. Maybe it's a nice lion. He won't. No. All lions are bad. All men are bad. And so our job as mental health practitioners is to block the generalization that that child had or that adult has, okay? And there are lots of methods to do that. But that's something that's showing up behaviorally, right? And sometimes those scars are not showing up behaviorally, and we need to find them, okay? That's the burden of the mental health practitioner, but what that's in an invitation to is to collaborate the mental health practitioner with the doctor, with maybe the neuroscientist, right? There's got to be a community that's doing this. It's not going to be one individual. How can a mental health practitioner have the skills to draw blood, take heart rate? There's no way that's going to happen. But it's got to be a collaboration. Okay, so that was a little bit about the past. Now let's go into the present. What's happening to me? What I want to start with is the response part, and that's the traumatic symptoms. And I want to give you a little history here. The word trauma became part of the clinical language, vocabulary, going back to about the 1960s. And the reason for that was people started realizing that these veterans of war were coming back and doing these things that seemed unusual, unexpected. And the language, at least in the English language, was these people are just crazy. They run out into the street, they take their clothes off, they sit at home all day doing nothing. They're just crazy. And people started to realize in the clinical psychiatric area that no, there was a very specific response to the stress they had experienced during war. And that's where the term post-traumatic stress disorder became a part of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, literally the Bible for clinicians. So it became an official diagnosis like depression and schizophrenia, which were already in there. PTSD, okay? And associated with that, the psychiatrists and clinicians working with such individuals started to pick up on a series of symptoms that were definitional of PTSD. And what I'm going to present to you here is a cloud of those symptoms. And we'll walk through them so that you can understand what the clinical idea of trauma is. I say this because trauma has become part of our general language. What do I mean by that? I have a good friend. I saw him downtown one day. He was clearly very stressed and worked up. I said, Dan, what's going on? He said, I'm just completely traumatized. I said, well, what happened? He goes, I missed the flight for my vacation. No, Dan, you are not traumatized. Not trauma, right? You're upset, bad day, too bad, it's your vacation. I understand that. No trauma, okay? Trauma has these very specific symptoms that are triggered by these adverse events, okay? So, hyperarousal, very aroused, the emotions run very high and hot. So they're out of control often, very aroused. Second, hypervigilant, looking around all the time. Why? Because the world feels unsafe. So they're looking around. Where's the danger? That little boy spots me, out the door he goes. Mood swings from highs to lows, and they're constant, right? Not long ones where you're in a good space for several months and then one day you have a bad day. No, these are constant ups and downs, right? Like a roller coaster. Frequent anger and tantrums, like a little child. Child, right, doesn't get his food, throws himself on the ground. But we see that in adults who have PTSD. They throw fits. They have outsized reactions to small problems. What most people would consider to be small problems, they see as big problems. Intrusive imagery. They can't get out of their heads the traumatic experiences they had of seeing a buddy get shot in front of them, of losing somebody, of losing a limb, of losing a child. All these things intrude all the time. That imagery is right there behind their eyeballs. It's like the movie is playing in front of their eyes all the time. What that leads to often is nightmares and sleeplessness, poor sleep. They're constantly woken up. It's like they have an alarm going off all the time going, wake up, see the imagery, here we come, and you wake up. Waking up in a cold sweat, can't sleep. Dissociation. They lose themselves. They don't know who they are. Their identity has been dissolved, and they'll often even deny it. Okay? It's like melting away. A dissociation from who they are. They can't know where they are or identify who they are. Panic attacks. A situation just triggers them. They're nervous. They don't necessarily even know why they're nervous. They're panicking. And they may run out and do something. Flee a situation that can be completely calm. It could even be a sound that reminds them, Big Bang construction, that's a bomb. I'm out of here. Inability to love others. Poor attachment that has been dissolved, right? They can't love anyone. They can't trust anyone. Anxiety and depression, major mental health conditions. Of course, panic attack, right? Being low, down, sad by all these things they can't do. Unmotivated and can't learn. Depressed. If you're depressed, can you learn? Are you motivated? No. They can't think clearly, can't learn. Shame and low self-worth. You saw it in that prison population. Take a step into the circle. Head goes down. Shame. One of the first behavioral indicators of shame, right? Head's down. Can't look at somebody. When you see a cloud like this, and for those of you who are in the mental health profession, what do we do? What a mess, right? And this is trauma? Does that give us any indication of what to do? It's too much here. So the idea I want to leave you with tonight, which is on the next slide, is that what we have learned is that different types of adversity can lead to what I will call traumatic signatures. In the same way that you have an individualized fingerprint that identifies you as you, same is true with your tongue. You have a tongue print, if you didn't know that. There are also individual signatures on the brain. So I want you to think about the idea that your brain is shaped by your experiences and creates individual signatures or individual brain prints that are a signature of you. And those are the good things and they're the bad things. Okay? So to really help you understand this and to give you some practical ideas, here's what I want to do. I want to focus on two types of traumatic signatures. One that comes from neglect of the lack of experiences, and the second signature that comes from abuse. Okay, so tonight we're just going to consider two types of signatures, a neglect signature and an abuse signature. And the key idea is that by understanding the signatures, you will be better equipped to know what to do, what to treat. Let's think about neglect. The opposite of neglect is a nurturing, experiential world for that developing child, right? Children come into the world and they have certain expectations that my parents who gave birth to me will take care of me. They'll nurture me. They'll give me a safe environment. They'll feed me. They'll play with me. They'll teach me, right? The baby is built to expect those things. Their biology says, this is what you can expect. I don't mean consciously, but they come into the world saying, hey, this is my world. Give me those things. What's neglect? I don't get those things. When the child gets those experiences, this frontal part of the brain requires those experiences to develop within the first 3 years of life. That's a critical window of opportunity. If the experiences happen, that frontal area, which is involved in attention, memory, learning, planning, decision-making, self-control, they mature appropriately. If that baby does not get those experiences within the first 3 years, that system starves and is very delayed, and if it continues, it may never develop. So here's one way of thinking about early attachment. I want you to think about a tennis match where the baby is the server and the parent is the return of server. Okay? Baby serves up a need. Cries, I need to be fed. Mother comes over, feeds the baby. Baby goes like this to the father picks up the baby. Baby engages in some type of looking or pointing, and the parent orients to where the baby is pointing and responds. So the serve is returned. Now, as in tennis, some serves are out of bounds. They shouldn't be responded to, right? Many of you may have children. If you have a 3-year-old who says, please give me a smartphone, I hope your answer is no, out of bounds, right? Or if you're involved in doing something else, maybe with your other children or you're cooking, and the baby says, I need food now, I hope the answer might be, wait a minute, right? So there can be some delays. But if those serves are consistently not returned, what does the baby learn? The world is unsafe. My needs are not being met. And now the baby does not thrive. So neglect, the signature is attachment fails and learning fails. And if learning fails, that baby is not ready for school and ultimately is not ready for the world because they will not learn from their actions. And if they don't have good attachment with their parents, who they should expect it from, how are they going to form attachment relationships with anybody else? They don't trust anybody else. And they shouldn't, because the parent should be the default for attachment and trust. And now they've learned, I don't. So the signature of neglect is a failure of attachment and learning. Okay, what about abuse? This is focused on the child post-birth. But I want to point out that pregnancy also has its effect even earlier in development. And here is the point I want to make. This is a very recent study that was just published in the United States, which finds significant declines in maternal mental health is associated with infant mental health. And here's the key idea, coming from now several studies. If a mother has poor mental health and is stressed by her pregnancy, that fetus develops in an environment which is stressful. And what we are seeing is that by the age of 5 or 6 years old, that baby now has a highly significant chance of depression, anxiety, aggression, attentional problems, just because the mother was stressed. So it's not just post-birth, it's that early environment of fetal development which needs to be nurturing as well. the negative experience, that stressful experience from the mom, is going to, in some cases, result in poor mental health of that child. Okay. What about abuse? Abuse affects two other systems primarily, and that's attention and emotion. Whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional abuse, that child's brain is on high alert. There's a particular area of the brain which is involved in emotion processing and fear in particular, called the amygdala. And that area is on high alert. It's activating all the time. Why? Because the child feels unsafe. They've learned from emotional abuse and physical abuse and sexual abuse, the environment's not safe. Again, if my family does this to me, what about the rest of the world? There are different responses to that alert system, and it's important to recognize these as well. Let me give you the four. Sometimes when a child feels the world is unsafe, they may run away. That's what that little boy did that I spoke about in my classroom. Whoa, looks like my father abused me. I'm out of here. I'm running away. Another response is to fight back, because maybe I can beat the person who is threatening me. So I fight back when I'm afraid. A third response is I just freeze, as if I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed in some ways. And the fourth response is one I just want to spend a little time talking about, which is that you feign to be almost dead. This is the most common response to sexual abuse. I've seen several times in children that I've worked with who have been sexually abused, is they fall down to the ground and it's as if they're dead. There are almost no life signs, it seems like, barely showing signs of breathing. They just almost like they passed out. I bring this up because a year ago in the United States, there was a very important article written because in many cases of sexual abuse and rape in the United States, judges or prosecutors were often asking the women, more commonly, why didn't you fight back? Why did you just lie there? As if it was their problem. And now it's being recognized that feigning death is a response, an adaptive response that we know happens in thousands of other animals. Why? If you're a prey, a small prey, with a very large predator who can kill you, what do predators do when they come across dead animals? They keep walking. Very good response. Maybe that big guy will keep moving. Okay? So it's become recognized as a response to that type of traumatic experience. Okay? So we know from a lot of scientific work that a common signature of abuse is it affects attention, remember, hypervigilance, right? Unsafe world, and it causes that hypoarousal, right? These big emotions. So if you live in an unsafe world, what's the dominant emotion? Fear. And often shame. Why shame? Because the child thinks, what's wrong with me? I must be the bad one. You beat me. There must be something wrong with me that you would beat me. They talk to their friends. Are you getting this experience at home? No. Then it must be me. There's something wrong with me. Why would somebody sexually abuse me? Why would somebody tell me I'm worthless? Emotional abuse. Now I'm afraid of the world. There must be something wrong with me. So you have these two strong emotions. So when you asked about mental health, this is now a target for the healing. It's not about you. It's about those who did this to you. You're the victim. There's nothing wrong with you, right? And now the healing can begin about healing the fear. The world is not as unsafe as you think it is. Let me show you in different ways. Let me show you that you should not feel shame. Okay? So they can begin that process of recovery. Okay, that's a little bit about the present, so you can see what's happening to the individual as you're working with these individuals in whatever context you may be working with them in. And that includes the workplace. Remember, these childhood experiences are carrying into adulthood. They may be carrying into some of you, many of you. Okay, so questions here. A couple of short questions before we move on to the last part. Online questions?
So the first question is, could you repeat your definition of childhood? What would that entail? How would someone know that these specific events happen during their childhood, and how would they relate that to trauma?
Okay, good. So the original definition of childhood from the ACES questionnaire was birth to 18. And what I'm encouraging everyone to think about, and this again comes from the scientific layer, not just me, is that childhood starts in fetal development and extends up to at least the age of 25, because the frontal lobe of our brain continues to mature until that age. And therefore, when we think about adverse childhood experiences, it must include that span of time, from early fetal development up until the age of 25. The second point related to this is that that's about the experiences. It's not about the responses to those experiences. And the responses can happen both during the experiences and continue well after that. Some children, going back to the point made earlier, can have experiences early and the trauma doesn't show up until much later. So an important thing for people to be considering is the ACEs questionnaire asks about what happened in the past. But we are often, certain professions are often in the business of finding out what's happening to the child as it's happening. Here's an important piece that many of you may be aware of. During COVID, when schools in many parts of the world closed, departments of child and welfare services showed a decrease in childhood maltreatment. That was not because children were not being maltreated, it's because teachers were not reporting it. Because they weren't in school. Teachers are often the eyes of what's happening to children at home. So that lower level was completely artificial. In the United States, which as many of you know, we have the highest level of gun violence in the world. Gun violence went through the roof during COVID. Why? Children were getting access to guns because they were home all the time. They could see their parents unlocking it or where the gun was. Not because there was less maltreatment, there was more maltreatment. Okay? So the key idea is that there's a long span of childhood development. We are very strange as a species. The primates you see on the savannah, the baboons and the tumbili, they develop very quickly. We, very slow to develop. That's because we have this huge brain. Not pointing to my brain, you all have the same huge brain. But it's slow to develop.
Thank you so much for that detailed response, Marc. I think I'll proceed to ask the next two that were shared online. So for our second question, is it possible for people to have zero ACEs? And are there studies of this group or in this research on how their life ends up? That's the first one.
Yeah.
And the second one is, which trauma has more effect on a child? For example, can domestic abuse be mild as compared to verbal abuse? And what would be the severity based on the type of ACE they experience?
Yeah, good. So the numbers will vary in terms of the first question. In the original study, just to give you an idea, 23% of the 17,000 people had one or more ACEs, meaning the rest had no ACEs, okay? So yes, there are people with zero ACEs, okay? I have friends who have no ACEs. I had one big one, bullying. So one of the important parts about that question is the number at a population level seems to have an effect. The more, the worse the health risks. Okay? 0 ACEs means you just had none of those during that period. Remember, birth to 18. But that doesn't mean you couldn't have had something at 19 or 20 or 21 or 22. Okay? And those can all impact development. But the critical message is the ACEs that occur, especially early in development, those first few years of life, are more likely to have negative effects on the developing child. Okay, there was a second part to that question. So so how many people have 0 ACEs? The answer is yes. And then there was a second question.
So the second question is, which trauma has more effect on a child? For example, domestic will be mild, verbal abuse will be severe, something like that.
Okay, good. So I want to make sure that we all leave with the language. So it's not which trauma is worse, it's which adverse experience can lead to worse trauma. Okay? So here's a result that's come out recently. The adversity which seems to lead to the worst health outcomes. Anybody want to take a guess? What do you think? Bullying. Sexual harassment. Anybody else? Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse, either on its own or with anything else, has the worst negative outcomes, the most intractable outcomes in some ways. In part because it's such a loss of identity that happens so early in childhood. Needless to say, and all of you know this, sexual abuse in adulthood is also extremely traumatic and bad. But when it happens in childhood, especially from a family member, the scarring is worse. And when it happens before puberty, it's even worse. Okay, so we have a developmental period. When it happens before puberty, it's the worst. When it happens after puberty, but before young adulthood, it's really bad. And when it happens in adulthood, it's bad, but not as bad as those earlier periods. Okay? Again, keep in mind, and you all know people like this, there is the resilience piece. Did that child have someone that he or she could go talk to about what happened? Was there support from family members? Right? Case that you are all familiar with, in my own country, the cases of sexual abuse in the churches of children. Thousands and thousands of cases. We know about these individuals who now as adults are coming out. They've kept that scar inside. Okay? So sexual abuse seems to have the biggest scarring of the body. Okay, so I think we'll go on to the last part. Thank you for those excellent questions. Very, very good. So I want to just keep us focused on this idea of what we can do, and a key part of that is to think about individual differences, right? I started with these two individuals. I don't know what happened to Serena, but Badrick was resilient for many reasons. Some may be his biology, some the social support systems he received in the school, and many other possible factors. But the individual differences part here are absolutely critical to the work that we can do to help people recover from their traumatic experiences. This goes back to a question that you asked at the beginning, which is kind of, what can we do and how can we see things? Maybe we can't see things. And what I want to talk about is an example of deceptive appearances, that what we see at the surface may not be what's happening underneath. And I want to give you an example. And this comes from this picture. This is a photograph of a young musician when she was in her 20s. And some of you may know her, and her name was Sinead O'Connor, an Irish singer. And if you look at her face, and you can find thousands of pictures of her at this period of time, what you'll see is what looks like a healthy person with sparkling eyes, alive, energetic, vivacious, really seems to really be with it. And she was very, very successful. She recently passed away, but she had written in her memoirs, she wrote this: child abuse is an identity crisis, and fame is an identity crisis. So I went straight from one identity crisis into another. She was the victim of severe maternal child abuse, physical and emotional, and she would often run away from home to hide from it. But she was suffering, but much of it was under the hood, under the skin. And inside she was suffering, but on the outside was conveying a sense of strength and energy. So we have to be careful. What's going on inside may not show up on the surface unless we can dig deeper and these individuals find a space to share what happened to them, the past. So what I want to turn to now is a way for you to think about the work that you may be doing, or the work that you hope to do, which is about trauma-sensitive engagement. And that is, in some sense, listening to the individual's body, listening to what they say. And here are some ideas. When you're working with a child, consider the idea that the child is seeking safety. Because remember, what a lot of these traumatic experiences do is it makes them feel unsafe. So is the environment in which you're interacting with that child a safe one for them? Are they looking around while you're talking to them? Because they're worried. So what are their eyes doing? Right? Are they tense? Are they nervous? What is their body doing which suggests either calm or lack of safety? They're asking for safety. They're also asking, and I mean this not necessarily in an explicit way, but in an implicit way, is they're asking, help me trust you. Because where are they starting from? Is complete lack of trust. If there's a scale which goes from 0 to 100 on trust, where are you? 0. Why? Because they've learned the world is unsafe and no one can be trusted. So help me trust you. Empathy and compassion. Have empathy for them, not just compassion. Being nice to them is one thing, but put yourself in their shoes. What's empathy? It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to imagine what it's like to be them. Right? And this is at all levels of society. We were recently speaking to a group at the Nairobi probation hostel with boys who were 17 and older who have been arrested. Imagine they're arrested by a police officer for a crime. Does that police officer put him or herself in that child's shoes? Probably not. You're wrong what you just did. Now what's going to happen to that child? Are they going to give you information? No way. They just shut down completely. So in all walks of life, we need to be thinking about, put yourself in their perspective. What is it like to be them now? What's happening to them now? And understand my body. Look at my body. Am I clenching my fists? Am I shaking? What's my body doing? And how can I help you maybe change your body and what it's doing? And understand what I can learn. The mind that feels unsafe or the neglected mind, remember, has difficulty learning. If I've been neglected, I'm not processing well what you're saying to me, no matter how clearly it is. You may be speaking quickly, and it's going in one ear and out the other. Or if I have been abused and attention is all over, if I'm not attending to you, can I learn from you? No. So understand what I can learn. So as we go forward, and as you go forward into the organizations that you work with, I want to share with you what it means to have a trauma-informed organization. And it consists of 4 R's, 4 words and ideas that start with the letter R. And the first is to realize that traumatic experiences are common. You now know a number, 1 billion children a year. If you think this is uncommon, you are wrong. It's common. It's in your backyard. Secondly, it's to recognize the signatures of those traumatic experiences so that you can, 3, respond to them, intervene, give them ways of healing. So realize it's common, recognize the symptoms or the signatures, respond by intervening that will help them. And 4th, very important to you as practitioners, resist being re-traumatized. Many of you here tonight may have had childhoods with some of these experiences. When you work with others, it may re-traumatize you. If you're not healthy, you can't help others. So the organization needs to take care of you as well. Let me leave you with an idea about flipping the script from where many in the world are today. From a punitive way of thinking about when people do things that are inappropriate, unexpected, or what we might call bad, I want you to flip the script from what's wrong with you to what's happening to you. From don't do that to what else can you do? From that's bad to how might that affect others? The green column is the helping column. It puts you in a position of saying, how can I help you? Not, I'm judging you. We want to be helping, not judging, not condemning, not bad. Let's find some other way of doing this. This isn't a job for one of you. This is truly a job for a village, a community, and a community of people with different expertise that are working together. So let's leave with a message of hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. I hope you are leaving with hope, with ideas for how to help others. Thank you. Questions? We can start here, please.
So I had a question for the second presentation, where you mentioned pain as what is a trauma response? Is it the same as disassociating? Is that the word?
Saying pain? Feign. Oh, feigning. Yeah. About the question, what is feigning?
Is it the same as disassociation?
No, it can be. Feigning is very particular. It's really the shutting down of the body. Dissociation is sort of the dissolving of the sense of self, is that they're no longer kind of present. They may be attentive and awake and so forth, but they're not quite there, okay? So I may be talking to you, and it's as if no one's home. They've lost themselves. They lost who they are, lost what's going on in the world, but they're still there. Feigning is literally acting as if you're dead. Okay? And I don't mean acting in the sense that you're putting on an act. Your body shuts down. Okay? So again, you see this is an old system that comes from old animals. Okay? Many animal species do this. If you're a prey item and a very large predator is coming down, they literally look like they're dead. Dissociation is a very particular human quality, where the mind sense of self and who they are and where they are dissolves, okay? Just imagine like a screensaver where a very clear photograph all of a sudden filters away. The image gets very blurry. That's what's happening to the mind. It's becoming very, very blurry, okay?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Lynette with Shuli, and I work with Finding Me Community. It's a youth-led organization where we are working on creating peer-led safe spaces for the youth, where they can find community, learn and practice skills to flourish. So my question, one of the major things that we are working in creating for the youth is resilience. And my question is around, so for example, for our program where we are creating safe spaces specifically for the youth between the age of 18 to 24, so how can we, as community-based peer groups, help clinical interventions in helping people process their childhood trauma?
Yeah, good question. So maybe a little bit of a plug for the Shamiri certificate. But a somewhat of a short answer, and this is something that might be helpful for you for another presentation I'll be doing on Monday at 5:30 in Shamiri, both hybrid and in person. Is more focused. It's a focus for teachers, but the strategies will be very helpful for you. Part of, and I'll give you a couple just simple ideas, just to make it simple, because it's a very large question. And I know there are other questions. For many individuals, there are things that bring on anxiety or concern that make them feel stressed. And there are some very simple breathing techniques that can help, that if becomes part of practice. Again, I'm giving you something that costs no money. But the simple answer is, there's a very long nerve in your body called the vagal nerve, and it controls your heart, and it controls the heartbeats. And when you're in a calm state and social, wanting to interact, and as many of you know, when you're depressed, you don't want to interact with others, or if you're very stressed, you don't want to interact with others. Okay? So the beating of the heart is very variable. The time in between beats is very variable, turns out, when you're calm. You can bring that state on by a breathing technique, which is to breathe in for 5 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds, and do that for 2 to 3 minutes. And to practice that habit when you're in a calm state, so that when you're not in a calm state, you can call it up as a habit. Okay, that's a method that I can imagine that those youths who are coming into your facility, you work on that. It's like a meditative practice, but it's something they can use in or outside of your environment, okay? So again, that doesn't require those kinds of monetary resources, but there are other kinds of coping strategies that you can give to them, that when they're feeling worried, things they can fidget with and play with. They can be art supplies, they can be music. There are many ways of dealing with those things that they need to have a toolkit that when they're feeling worried, they can call those things up. So if that space has those kinds of tools available, you have given them the things to be able to cope. One of the key ideas from what we talked about tonight is that if there are certain things from your childhood that trigger you, our jobs as mental health practitioners, and I use that in the broadest sense, is not to eliminate the triggers, because the world is full of them. We can't do that. We can't eliminate the world, but we can give you tools to address the triggers. And that's what your space can do, is give them those coping strategies. And I think there's some online questions.
Hi, my name is Wangoi Maina. So we work in the same organization, Finding Me. Maybe in regards to the first part of your presentation, where you highlighted some of the issues that we have with the ACESs questionnaire, where you said it measures experiences and not responses. So my question would be, are there tools that measure responses to know if a child is actually having a resilience response, or is it traumatic, other than the symptoms maybe that comes afterwards, maybe with being hyper vigilant or having hyper arousal or something? So that's something I'd want to know.
Yes, very good. So I'll give you a two-part answer to your one-part question. So the first thing is, the ACEs questionnaire is a tool that's readily available online. You can use it. In fact, there's an ACE IQ, meaning International Quotient. So it's been broadened now. And I would highly recommend that if you use it, you get that one, not the original one, because it goes outside the family. So ACEs, IQ. That can be a very effective thing to have individuals fill out and to use it in the following way, just like with the Compassion Prison Project with the prisoners. It is incredibly healing when people who have had a high number of ACEs or a small number of ACEs to realize they're not alone. It will break down barriers. So all of a sudden there's people maybe from different groups in Kenya, Luo, Kamba, Kikuyu, and they think, I'm a Luo, I'm different than you, or Kikuyu, and all of a sudden, were you emotionally abused? And they both walk forward. Whoa, you too? That can be very healing. But I want to give you a very strong warning. Let them know at some point, this is not predictive of your health consequences. It is not predictive for all the reasons we talked about tonight, but it can be healing to know that you're not alone. That's one. Second, I'll give you another tool. It's called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire. This is about responses, not necessarily to adversity, but it asks questions like, not true, somewhat true, certainly true. I have a hard time sitting still. I am nice to others, right? And you ask those questions. Now, these are the responses in the world of behavior, and it's asking what they think of themselves, strengths and difficulties. Now, importantly, and this is where your work would come in, or any of you who use these things, my perception of what's a difficulty may not be calibrated to what actually is a difficulty in both directions. Mark writes, I am really nice to others. Very true. And you think, Mark is not very nice to others. But now you know what to work on. My perception, which gets affected by childhood adversity, now you know. But here's an important message for all of you. Just because you see somebody write, I can't sit still, has problems with attention or self-control, don't assume it's because of childhood trauma. There are many reasons for not being able to sit still. Some, due to biology, have attention disorders. Has nothing to do with childhood trauma. Okay? Some people have depression, which has nothing to do with childhood trauma. So don't assume the cause from the response. Very dangerous. Okay? I want to say this really strongly. I don't want anyone here to do two mistakes. To assume that a high ACE score equals big problems for health, and neither do certain kinds of health responses, body or brain, indicate childhood trauma. They might, but they might not. Okay? Natalie, you want a few questions from online?
Okay. How can I support someone with panic attacks but doesn't want to see a counselor?
I'm going to repeat the question to make sure I heard it. How can I support someone with panic attacks by seeing a counselor, or if I don't have a counselor?
No. How can I support someone with panic attacks who does not want to see a counselor?
So there are strategies to help individuals with panic attacks that do not require seeing a counselor. Some of the strategies involve working through the triggers for the panic, what's causing them. So just as an example, let's say it's someone with social anxiety who, when they're going to walk into a situation that's social, they feel a panic attack coming on, and they may never walk into that situation. So part of it can help is to map out for them what could go wrong. Sometimes what the panic is triggered by is they imagine all the things that could go wrong. And sometimes even just writing that down can help calm the system. This has been done in a lot of different situations. For example, in school environments, they have a panic attack before they go into an exam. And what's been shown very, very clearly is if you write down all the reasons why you're having that panic attack, they look at that and they go, wait a minute, I studied well for this. I have no reason to be anxious. And that can calm that system down. Similarly, the breathing method that I mentioned before. Again, panic leads to stress, which means to shutting down. That breathing method can also be a method for bringing those systems down. So there are many strategies out there. Again, we could talk for hours about this, but that can help them prepare for the situation they're going into to bring that system to greater calm, that don't require a counselor.
Yes, we have one more from Cynthia, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much for your input. Now, I wanted to find out for neurodivergent individuals, because you mentioned in utero all the way to 25 years, and I have the understanding that for neurodivergent individuals, that means the brain maturing at the age of 30 or mid-30s or so. So that's one. And two, I wanted to find out, is phoning a trauma response? And if you could elaborate more on the difference between feign and freeze.
Okay, very good. So for neurodivergence, so I'm assuming that many here know the concept, but the idea is that we have a diversity of mental capacity as a species, and so it's a spectrum of possibilities. And so the term came out of understanding autism. And so autism isn't just one thing, but there's a spectrum. And so divergent, the idea means it's divergent from what some consider to be typical, or the word normal is sometimes used, but some common way that humans mostly respond, and there's some divergence or deviation from that. Okay? There's no value judgments on that. It's just different from the norm, whatever the norm is defined as. This is a huge topic, and it's in some ways divergent from the core topic of today, which is childhood trauma. But let me mention a couple things. One, some of the highest incidents of maltreatment come from children with disabilities, of which autism is included. So we need to be aware that children with disabilities, autism, Huntington's disease, other kinds of diseases that can affect the mind and body, are often maltreated. Why? Because parents with those kind of children may not understand what's happening to their children. So part of it is an education on the parent side. Okay? In autism, as many of you will know, a child may be very, very delayed in language development, will have different kinds of emotional responses than a typically developing child. For example, children with autism very early on in development, as opposed to non-autistic children, and I mean babies in this case, if you take a young baby, and what do mothers and fathers do when they're holding their babies? They look at their eyes. That eye contact is like glue. What does the autistic baby do? They look away. They are eye gaze averse. And as they get older, if children, peers, family members say, "Why aren't you looking at me? Look at me when you're talking to me." Punitive, what's wrong with you? That's the wrong message. Because for them, what is eye gaze? It's aversive. It's actually painful. For them, that social interaction, that eye gaze is a threat. And that's important to know for teachers, for anyone in business, for anyone who may have such individuals. Because when they're looking away from you, they're not trying to be rude. That's a mechanism for them socially. They're socially engaged with you, just they're not looking at you. Okay? So there are many things that come along with neurodivergence. Some are sensory sensitivities. They have high levels of sensory sensitivity. Loud noises will hurt their ears. So you'll sometimes see, if you work in schools, that in neurodivergent populations, in special needs schools, these children often wear headphones to calm the noise down, calm their brains down. Okay? So there are many ways of responding to that. Importantly, neurodivergence is not caused by childhood trauma. It is not a cause. It can exacerbate some of the symptoms, but it's not the cause. Okay? The second question was, and I think this may be a good place to end, is just the distinction between feigning and freezing. Feigning, the simple way of thinking about it is it's acting as if dead. The system just shuts down. Freezing is I'm sitting here and I'm just standing and I'm not responding, as if nothing is going on. But I'm not lying down and dead. Remember, feigning is a response often to sexual abuse or a sexual predator, because predators will often ignore something that's not moving. Okay? Freezing is the hope that the threat will go by or will go away. You know, if a teacher's asking a child who's been abused something, maybe if I just sit here long enough, they'll just move on to the next student. Okay? So very different kinds of responses. They're adaptive responses that are affected by the experience of what that child has learned is effective for them. And part of the work in mental health is giving them alternative ways of responding, right? Shutting yourself down isn't ultimately going to help you. I know it helped you in the moment, but let's find something different, right? The world may not be that threatening to you. Let's find another way of responding when you feel threatened. Ask for help. Go into breathing. Find something else you can do.
Sorry,
Yes?
Mark, I also asked about fawn as a trauma response. Does it apply in this case? Fawn, F-A-W-N.
Fawn. I don't know. Why don't you tell me what you mean?
Fawning is where you become a people pleaser towards your abuser or towards people. So you end up.
Yes. So you said the word fawn as in appeasement.
Yes.
Yes. It certainly applies here. So fawning is the idea that you are in some ways trying to appease your abuser, right? To do things that will calm them down in some sense or do what they please. And that is absolutely a response. Commonly with domestic violence, fawning is a very common response, as is with sexual abuse. You're trying to appease the predator, do things, make offerings that will appease them in some ways. So absolutely. In some ways, just as a matter of time, I didn't add the fifth F, but fawning is an absolute response to certain types of adversity as a traumatic response. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Mark, we have around 4 more questions, but we can stop whenever you'd like us to.
Okay.
So I'll just ask the first one. In adults aged 18 years and older who experienced ACEs before age 18 and whose resilience is being measured now, for example, in relation to a recent event like preterm birth, how can we clarify whether the resilience score reflects their current capacity to cope or the resilience they had at the time they experienced the ACE?
Okay, so to make sure I understood the question, I think the question resolves around if adversity happens after the age of 18. Is that the idea?
Yeah, if it happens preterm or after the age of 18, when was resilience? How can we determine when resilience?
Okay, so again, a really good question, and I'll give hopefully a short, succinct answer. During the course of development, there are different critical or sensitive periods, these windows of opportunity, where if certain things don't happen or negative, toxic things happen, those systems either may get very delayed or may not occur at all. So for example, during early kind of fetal development, a lot of the sensory systems are developing. And we know that there are certain kinds of in utero qualities that if they're not occurring, for example, congenital deafness or congenital blindness, which would then show up later, maybe due to glaucoma or a cataract, if those systems are not addressed early, you are going to see significant delays. For example, it wasn't until quite recently that a child born with a cataract, that there were good enough surgeries to remove them. A child with cataracts has their vision minimized. What does that mean? Of course, when the cataract is removed, they've had maybe years of experience they never had. Practically, what that will mean is that the first 5 to 6 years of life are critical for facial recognition and facial emotion. They've missed that. So now facial emotion recognition is greatly delayed. Okay? Language has a different time course, where if a child hasn't heard language, been able to practice language, there are different critical milestones. The first few years of life, hearing the sounds of the native language, hearing the words and building those vocabularies, if those words don't come in, you get delays. Let me give you an example. Very well done. In most families that are reasonably well off financially, parents who have the time will read to their children from a very early age. So they're hearing all this language. So a study that was done in the United States in Harlem, a very poor area of New York City, what was happening was those children were not hearing stories. What were they hearing? Clean up your room, don't do that, go to school. They were hearing all these negative commands. That was their vocabulary. So they had a very poor vocabulary. Okay? Also, those adverse experiences, they're happening those critical periods, you are modeling poor behavior. If I'm being neglected and now I become a mother or a father, what have I learned? What neglect looks like. And now I may neglect my child because that was what was modeled for me. So those early attachments have a different time span. Going later on in life, we have, as we get older, the brain becomes less malleable, less plastic. For example, during puberty is a period where the brain is changing a lot. If negative experiences happen then, you are molding negative brain movement. If good experiences there, you are reshaping in a different way. The older we get, the harder it is to mold. So if those adverse experiences happen, let's say when you're 21, when that frontal lobe is still maturing, the system that regulates the brain and can control the impulses may get very delayed. That goes back to the comment about COVID. What we have been seeing in schools that I have personal experience with is 18-year-olds who are acting like 14-year-olds or 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds because they missed all this critical social experience. They're 18, but that brain still needs that input, and now they're delayed. They graduated from their secondary school, they're potentially going into college, but they are socially immature. They're not ready for college. But there's nothing we can do about it. They applied, they got in. But no one screened them for their social skills. And they're not ready. Okay. Another question?
I think this can be the last one.
Very good.
What happens if a parent won't accept their loved one who is neurodivergent and is not willing to be educated? Asking for myself as an autistic person. Secondly, having endured similar traumatic experiences as a result of being autistic, where my meltdowns and shutdowns are treated as a form of indiscipline. What is one way to reach out to parents who are unwilling to learn about neurodiversity, especially autism?
Yeah. So there's certainly a very strong movement by the autistic community to bring greater awareness about neurodivergence and autism in particular. And I think this is where community work is absolutely fundamental. Community including, I would say, schoolwork. We need to educate the public about what it means to be neurodivergent so that rather than stigmatizing that what someone is doing is wrong, rather it's different. And how do we accommodate and respond to that? So again, I think there are many strategies for that, but I think this is going to require tremendous efforts for community involvement, which is reaching out to the community and talking about what it means to be neurodivergent. But I would just make this even a bigger conversation. It's what it means to have certain mental health issues. It's not just neurodivergence. It's what does it mean to be someone suffering from depression? Are they lazy? No. Again, it's not putting that value judgment. It's someone who has got an anxiety disorder, someone who is a mess? No, it's someone who's suffering from certain responses to the environment. How can we help them? Again, what I like is this flip the script idea. If everyone had a lens on everyone else, which is not what's wrong with you, but what's happening to you, it changes the conversation. When somebody does something that is unexpected, whatever that means, it's not what you expected. If you say, well, that was bad, that was dumb, why did you do that? Now we're stigmatizing. But if it's, wait, let me understand where you're coming from. Empathy. Let me understand you better. For the child or the adult who is neurodivergent, their emotional processing of the world is different. Not bad, not wrong, not inappropriate, but different. It may manifest itself in our environments as difficult to manage. I work with children in schools who are neurodivergent who may scream 6-7 hours a day. Imagine that happening here. What will we do? Say, hey, I'm sorry, but you have to leave. And maybe that's an okay response because we have people who want to learn and listen, and this is disruptive, for sure. That's just saying what it is. But what could we do in preparation for a neurodivergent adult that would give them an environment where they can profit and learn? So that's thinking about different learning environments and communities that opens the door to that. Here's something that maybe you know or maybe you don't know. I know that Shamiri has just gotten into an incubator for artificial intelligence, which is wonderful. Do you know who some of the best programmers in the world are? The neurodivergent autistic individuals. They have a kind of a focus and a way of thinking that is different than non-autistic individuals. They are programming often geniuses. That's a special environment for them, right? Let's find those environments where they can grow and foster and work. But parents need to understand that it's not just that this environment is not one that may be most productive for them, but there are other environments where they are, where they can grow and thrive. So that's part of the education, is to reach parents in such a way that they can learn that there's not a stigma, there's an opportunity for growth.
Can we all give a round of applause to Dr. Marc for the lovely session he's given us? Do you receive the claps?
Yes.
So, finally, in case you want to learn more about Shamiri Institute, go to www.shamiri.institute. And in case you want to learn more about Shamiri Academy specifically, academy.shamiri.institute. Have a lovely night, everyone.